April 18, 1945, southern Okinawa, 230 hours. The rain had been falling for so long that many Marines could no longer remember what dry ground felt like. Water poured continuously across the shattered hills of the island, running through trenches filled with mud, blood, shell casings, and bodies left exposed where they had fallen days earlier. The sky above Okinawa no longer looked natural. Heavy clouds blocked the moon entirely, while artillery flashes from distant bombardments illuminated the darkness in brief white explosions that made the battlefield appear frozen for a fraction of a second before disappearing again into blackness. The sound of war never stopped. Naval guns thundered offshore with enough force to shake the earth beneath the Marines' boots. Mortar exploded in the distance. Machine gun fire echoed somewhere beyond the ridges. Yet, for First Sergeant Daniel Mercer of the 1st Marine Division, the worst sounds on Okinawa did not come from the battlefield above the surface. They came from beneath it. By the spring of 1945, Okinawa had become the final and most brutal campaign of the Pacific War. More than 180,000 American troops had landed on the island during Operation Iceberg, expecting another conventional amphibious assault similar to previous battles across the Pacific. Instead, they encountered something entirely different. General Matsuru Oshijima and the Japanese 32nd Army had transformed southern Okinawa into a massive underground fortress, hidden beneath limestone ridges and hills that from a distance appeared almost harmless. Beneath those hills existed miles of tunnels, underground hospitals, artillery chambers, ammunition depots, reinforced command centers, and hidden firing positions connected through narrow passageways carved directly into the island itself. American soldiers soon realized they were not fighting for control of the surface alone. They were fighting an enemy buried underground, an enemy that could disappear into the earth itself and emerge somewhere completely different hours later. Entire platoons vanished beneath sudden machine gun fire coming from cave mouths hidden behind rocks and vegetation. Marines would secure a ridge during daylight only to face gunfire from the same position again after nightfall because Japanese soldiers had simply retreated underground and waited. The Marines began referring to Okinawa as the world below. Some called it the island that breathed, others refused to talk about the caves at all. Mercer had already survived some of the bloodiest campaigns of the war. He fought on Peleliu, where heat and Japanese resistance nearly destroyed entire Marine regiments. He survived mortar attacks on Guam and witnessed flamethrowers turn bunkers into furnaces during assaults across the Pacific. But Okinawa affected experienced combat veterans differently. The battle did not merely exhaust the body, it consumed the mind. Rain fell constantly, turning roads into oceans of mud where vehicles sank completely beneath the surface. Corpses decomposed in open fields because recovery under enemy fire often became impossible. The smell lingered everywhere. Wet limestone, burned fuel, rotting flesh, smoke, blood, and cordite blending together into an odor many veterans later claimed they could still remember decades after the war ended. Sleep became almost impossible. Japanese artillery struck unpredictably during every hour of the night. Snipers hid inside tunnel systems so effectively that Marines often never saw the men shooting at them. Combat fatigue spread rapidly through entire units, creating paranoia and hallucinations among soldiers already pushed beyond physical exhaustion. But the caves created a different kind of fear. Inside Okinawa's tunnels, darkness felt alive. Water dripping from the ceiling echoed like distant footsteps. Air moved strangely through underground ventilation shafts, carrying whispers and sounds impossible to locate accurately. Men entering the tunnels quickly lost all sense of direction. Flashlight beams vanished into blackness after only a few feet, swallowed by endless narrow corridors beneath the island. Marines described the caves as psychologically oppressive in ways impossible to explain to someone who had never entered them. Some soldiers became convinced they heard voices speaking softly in Japanese from empty chambers. Others reported seeing movement at the edge of flashlight beams, only to discover nothing there at all. A few units began refusing assignments involving tunnel clearing operations, unless directly ordered by officers. That night, Mercer received orders to investigate a recently sealed cave system near Kakazu Ridge. Earlier in the evening, American engineers, supported by Sherman flamethrower tanks, had assaulted the tunnels using napalm and demolition charges. Jets of burning fuel had been blasted into the entrances. Before explosives collapsed the cave mouths beneath tons of limestone and debris. According to official reports, every Japanese soldier inside had either died in the attack or become buried beneath the collapse. The position was considered secure. But shortly after midnight, Marines guarding the perimeter began hearing sounds coming from beneath the sealed tunnels. At first, the noises seemed explainable. Okinawa's constant bombardments caused cave-ins regularly, and shifting rock often echoed strangely underground. But as the hours passed, the sounds became more organized. Deliberate, rhythmic, guards described hearing metallic scraping beneath the earth, followed by low voices drifting upward through cracks in the rock. Not screaming, not cries for help, calm whispering in Japanese. One Marine later compared it to workers inside a factory somewhere deep underground continuing their labor long after everyone should have been dead. Mercer arrived near the collapsed entrance shortly after 0200 hours with a small patrol assigned to inspect the site. Rain hammered the hillside while water streamed down through shattered limestone blackened by smoke and flamethrower residue. Several guards refused to stand near the cave entrance anymore. One young private looked physically shaken as Mercer approached, his rifle trembling slightly in his hands. Then Mercer heard it himself. Clang, 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 metal striking stone. Beneath the earth, the sound traveled upward through the rubble with horrifying clarity. Mercer crouched beside the collapsed entrance and pressed his hand against the wet limestone. Faint vibrations pulsed through the rock. Something below was moving, or trying to. Against the advice of the engineers, Mercer ordered a small opening cleared through the collapse. 4 Marines began digging, while others covered the entrance with rifles and flamethrowers in case surviving. Japanese soldiers emerged. Every few minutes, the metallic sounds stopped completely, as though whoever remained underground could hear the Americans working above them. Then the noises would begin again, farther inside the tunnel system. After nearly 40 minutes, the patrol uncovered a narrow opening leading into darkness beneath the rubble. Warm air drifted outward, carrying the overwhelming smell of decay, wet earth, and burned flesh. Flashlights illuminated fresh mud covering the tunnel floor, and tracks, long drag marks, stretched deeper underground toward areas supposedly destroyed. During the earlier assault, the patrol entered cautiously in single file. Within seconds, the outside world disappeared entirely. The rain, artillery, and battlefield noise vanished behind oppressive silence, broken only by dripping water echoing through narrow limestone corridors. The deeper they advanced, the warmer the air became. Burned Japanese ammunition crates lay scattered beside collapsed medical stations and bodies, partially buried beneath rock. Some corpses appeared fused against the walls by intense heat from flamethrower attacks. Others looked emaciated beyond recognition, their uniforms hanging loosely from skeletal remains. Yet the sounds continued. Ahead, clang, 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 always distant, always deeper, underground. Mercer's flamethrower operator, Vincent Callahan, later described the caves as feeling less like tunnels and more like a living thing digesting everyone inside. It, he claimed, silence, underground, became so intense that Marines started fearing it more than enemy gunfire. Every breath sounded too loud, every movement echoed endlessly through darkness. Men began imagining footsteps behind them even. When nobody moved at all, the patrol eventually reached a wider underground chamber supported by blackened wooden beams. A smashed Japanese field radio sat overturned near the center of the room, surrounded by military papers soaked from cave moisture. One overturned chair near the radio table moved slightly back and forth, as though recently disturbed. Nearby, a small oil lantern still released a faint trail of smoke from its wick, despite having no visible fuel remaining. Inside, someone had been there recently. Mercer noticed footprints crossing the wet clay floor. Bare footprints. Human. The impressions looked fresh enough that water still slowly filled them. But what terrified the Marines was where the tracks began and ended. They emerged directly from a solid limestone wall and stopped abruptly in the center of the chamber. There were no hidden passages, no openings, nothing. One Marine whispered nervously that maybe exhaustion was affecting everyone. Underground. Nobody answered him, because nobody wanted to admit the same thought had already entered their minds. Whispers returned somewhere ahead in the darkness. Soft Japanese voices, speaking too quietly to understand. Mercer ordered the patrol deeper underground. The tunnel descended sharply beneath the ridge, while the air grew hotter and harder to breathe. The smell of decomposition intensified until several Marines struggled not to gag. Eventually, the patrol reached another chamber resembling some kind of underground shrine. Torn imperial banners hung beside shattered ammunition boxes and burned medical equipment. Bodies lay everywhere across the floor, some clearly dead for weeks. Then one of them moved at first. Mercer thought the figure near the rear wall was another corpse standing upright against the limestone. Then the flashlight beam caught movement. A Japanese soldier stared back at them from across the chamber. Impossibly thin, his skin stretched tightly over bone-like parchment. His uniform hung loosely from his body, while his hands appeared bloody and raw, every fingernail completely torn away, as though he had spent days clawing through rock that the man did not tack. He simply stared silently into the flashlight beams with an expression so exhausted it barely seemed human anymore. One Marine shouted for him to surrender. The Japanese soldier slowly turned toward a narrow crevice in the rear wall, barely wide enough for a child to crawl through. Then, without a sound, he stepped backward into the darkness and disappeared. The patrol rushed forward. Instantly. Nothing remained beyond the crevice except solid stone. No tunnel. No exit, only a small oil lantern resting near the crack in the wall. Still warm to the touch, but Mercer picked it up carefully. The metal handle retained unmistakable heat, but when he opened the fuel chamber inside, it was completely empty. Then the whispers returned. Again, this time directly behind them. The Marines spun around with rifles raised toward the darkness filling the chamber between the bodies and broken shrine. Nothing stood there, but everyone heard it now. Breathing. Multiple people breathing slowly somewhere within the tunnels around them. Mercer finally ordered withdrawal, whatever remained beneath Okinawa. He no longer believed it could be explained entirely by surviving enemy soldiers or exhaustion. The patrol retraced its route toward the surface, but several Marines later claimed the tunnels no longer looked the same on the return journey. Passages seemed narrower. Chambers appeared where none existed before. More than once the men became convinced someone walked behind them in the darkness, only to find empty corridors, disappearing endlessly underground. When they finally emerged outside shortly before dawn, rain still covered Okinawa beneath low grey clouds. The men looked visibly different, exhausted, pale. One Marine reportedly vomited immediately after reaching the surface and refused to discuss what happened underground ever again. Officially, the incident became classified as a routine tunnel clearing operation involving possible Japanese holdouts. No supernatural details appeared in military reports. Officers blamed combat fatigue, stress, darkness, and surviving enemy soldiers hiding within undiscovered tunnel sections, and perhaps they were right. But after the battle ended in June 1945, stories continued. American occupation personnel later reported hearing strange noises from abandoned cave systems at night. Okinawan civilians avoided certain tunnels entirely, believing spirits of the dead remained trapped underground. Even years later, engineers sealing collapsed passages occasionally described hearing metallic sounds echoing beneath the limestone shortly before detonations. Historians explain many of these accounts logically. Okinawa's tunnel systems created complex acoustic distortions, capable of carrying sounds for incredible distances underground. Combat exhaustion caused hallucinations and paranoia among soldiers already psychologically broken by months of constant warfare. Isolated Japanese holdouts remained hidden inside caves long after the battle ended. Some unaware Japan had surrendered, but for the men who fought there, those explanations never fully erased the memory of what they experienced beneath the island, because Okinawa was not simply a battlefield, it was a grave beneath the earth containing over 100,000 Japanese soldiers, thousands of American troops, and countless civilians buried inside collapsed caves and underground chambers, where many bodies were never recovered at all, and sometimes, in places where suffering reaches unimaginable levels, memory itself begins to feel alive. Years later, Mercer wrote only one sentence about the tunnels in a private letter discovered after his death. "We entered those caves hunting soldiers. We left believing something else had survived down there."